There we go. I'm good. As I said in my introduction, one of the greatest things about my job is that I get to work with people just like these four you saw on stage just now. And the other great thing about my job is that I get to work with amazing other CCL staff. So while they are making their way up here, it is my privilege to introduce to you all, for one of the highlights of the afternoon, of course, Ben Pendergrass, CCL's Vice President of Government Affairs, and Jen Tyler, our Senior Director of Government Affairs, and they're going to come up and talk to you about legislative strategy and your lobby training. It's going to take them just a minute. Ready? Yeah. We're having technical challenges. Thank you for being patient. Ready? All right, welcome Ben and Jen to the stage, everybody. Great job.
Great job. You want that one? Are we on? Why did we get stuck following that panel? I always get bitter about the schedule here. Well, it's great to see everybody. I'm Ben. This is Jen. We're your government affairs team here in DC, and we are just really thrilled to see you guys. It has been since 2019 since we were on the Hill lobbying in person in force, and boy, a lot has happened since then. We had a global pandemic where we all learned to lobby virtually and be impactful and pass one of the biggest climate bills in history. We had not one, but two elections that changed the balance of power in DC. And so that's why we are so excited that you're back. And the other big change that we have is, like, back in the late teens, you know, we really struggled to just interject climate into the policy conversation. And now we are at a point where climate is part of every policy discussion. And we're having to be a little bit more adaptable because things are moving a lot faster and things are getting done, and that's a good thing. So we're really excited to be back here and have a really big impact in person. And I'll turn over to Jen for a couple minutes.
Yeah, so as some of you might know, the last time CCL lobbied in person in June, I was actually on the other side of things. I was a Hill staffer. So I was taking the meeting with CCL volunteers and my former boss, and of course the meeting went perfectly. The CCL volunteers were so informed, so educated, so respectful. By that point, we had already formed a really close relationship with our volunteers in the district. Most of the meeting was talking about local sports, but eventually we got to the substantive policy and we co-sponsored the supporting asks. We got further on the primary asks. It was another great meeting, one of many. But what really struck me was what happened outside of the meeting. I was staffing my boss that day in a number of hearings. We had to run and grab food, run back to the office, and everywhere we went, every elevator, every hallway, there were CCLers. And at the time, as a staffer, I was trying to get my boss where he needed to go on time, so I was a little annoyed that he stopped at every single opportunity to talk to the CCLers. But nonetheless, every volunteer was so warm, so welcoming, so respectful, engaged. Even if they had no idea who my boss was, or even more so if they knew who he was, maybe they didn't agree with him, they were just the pinnacle of respect. And the last stop, we went to the cafeteria, and on our way out, my boss turned around and he looked back and he said, "My God, they're really everywhere." The whole cafeteria, all of Longworth cafeteria, in every corner was a CCLer with a name badge on, dressed to the nines. And it really was something to see. So beyond the meetings you guys are going to have on Tuesday, which I know are going to be fantastic, and we're going to push our policy forward beyond where we have before, there's something bigger than that, something that breaks out of all of these individual offices, and that's just our presence on the Hill. I can't overstate how important it is that we show up in the numbers we show up in. We come with open hearts. We come trying to find common ground. We come trying to talk to our member of Congress, who's our neighbor, who's our community member, and act on meaningful climate policy, and that's not a common thing on the Hill. So we really are one of the few groups, and I think this is where we shine. This is our strong suit, is showing up in person, showing our commitment, the sacrifice you all have made to be here, and the kind of nature, the kind of values we have as an organization. So I am so excited to be here. I can't wait to be on the Hill with you guys on Tuesday and start lobbying. And before we dive into our primary asks, I want to take a step back and talk about the default debacle we just went through, fortunately avoiding catastrophe. But Ben, how does that impact where we're going, what our asks are?
Yeah, obviously, if you guys have been doing your homework, you know one of the things we have been planning to lobby on and are going to lobby on is permitting reform. But as part of the debt ceiling debate and final agreement, they did include some of that permitting reform provisions that we think will be helpful in that deal. And so does that affect what we're lobbying on? Yes and no. We are still lobbying on permitting reform. There's still a lot of things that are left undone. We know we need more stuff around transmission. We know we need stuff around greater community engagement. So there's still a need for a package, and that's what we're here to push. We don't have to be experts in all the details of it, but I think it's worthwhile just to go over. I'll have to read from the list because there's so many of the provisions that were included in the debt ceiling package. In the debt ceiling package, we got provisions establish a lead agency when multiple are involved. That was something we thought was really good. It directs agencies to create a single document when feasible instead of multiple documents. Environmental assessments are limited to 1 year and 75 pages. Bigger environmental impact statements are limited to 2 years and 150 pages, with big projects being 300. But there are deadline extensions allowed if needed when things are coordinating, when the agency thinks they need it and the applicant works with them. It allows project applicants to do some of the work that then the agencies have to review and take ownership of. It expands the development and use of pragmatic environmental reviews and tiered analysis, which can reduce duplicative reviews and improve efficiency. It directs the CEQ to study and submit a report on creating an online NEPA permitting portal and authorizes $500,000 to do that. It also directs there to be a study of electric transmission interconnection capabilities, that's a mouthful, including recommendations for prudent additions to total transfer capability between neighbors. Those are just some of the main provisions that were included in debt ceiling debate, but that's not all of permitting reform, but that's what did get enacted into law, and offices are not going to expect you guys to be an expert in these things by any means, but if you want to continue to dive down the rabbit hole on it, Dana Nuccitelli, our research coordinator, has put together some great educational resources on what was included in the debt ceiling, and I recommend you check those out. So what do you think how the debt ceiling getting done really impacts our lobby day? Jen, what do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I think it's progress. It's really exciting that we're going to the Hill to lobby on something that Congress is already working on. We're not bringing them a new topic that they haven't heard of. We're not trying to convince them of something they're unsure of. We're talking about something that a lot of people in both parties already agree with, getting something done. We need to take that one step further and tell them they need to get more done and tell them they need to get the right things done. So what are we looking for in terms of permitting reform? The top line, we want comprehensive bipartisan permitting reform. So we want to make sure we're not doing this piecemeal, we're not doing it on a party line basis, but we're getting all of this done. It's a serious enough topic, it has enough implications, both for the climate, but also for communities all across the country, that it warrants its own discussion. We need to have serious dialogue, serious debates and hearings on this, and its own package going forward. So we want a comprehensive bipartisan permitting reform package. And that includes two things from our perspective. One is that we need to reduce carbon emissions by permitting and approving clean energy projects faster. And two, we need to protect American health and the safety of our communities. So those are our two must-haves in any permitting reform bill. Now there's 4 specific policies, I'll say, that we included as things we want to see in the package. I want to state carefully, these are not the only 4. There's a lot that will go into permitting reform. There's a lot we already saw that Ben listed in the debt ceiling, but these are just the 4 we think are a good starting point, or what we consider to be must-haves to meet those 2 criteria I just listed. So the first one being, we want to allow transmission lines to be built and permitted faster. We're going to have a lot of clean energy coming online, solar, wind, all sorts of things, and we need to be able to get that new power, that clean energy, to the places that need it. So a lot of times that's from the middle of the country out to the coast. That's what the transmission lines will help us do. So that might look like giving FERC more authority to permit transmission lines. There's a lot of different proposals there, but transmission has to be a part of this. Second, we want to reduce the amount of time it takes to get clean energy projects built. So there's a lot of things that were included in the debt ceiling that help make this process more efficient, but there's more that can be done to make sure we don't have a bunch of duplicative processes, we don't have really long onerous reporting processes, but we're also preserving those important environmental standards. Third, we want to make sure federal agencies are more efficient. There's a lot of agencies that are involved in permitting, and a lot of times they're working on the same thing at the same time. It's very duplicative, or they're having disagreements all throughout the process and kicking things back and forth for years. We want to really streamline that process. We want to make sure we're keeping the important standards in place, but that there's dispute resolutions for these agencies to work through. They have the expertise they need to do this in a quick and efficient manner. So there's a lot to be done on the agency level that Congress can authorize that will help speed up this process. And fourth, and what I think is most important, is we really want to make sure there's robust and meaningful early community engagement on permitting. There's already community engagement, obviously, in any permitting process, and we don't just want to maintain that. We want to improve that. Right now, communities are not being heard as often as they need to be in these permitting processes. It's not early on enough for their feedback to be taken into consideration, or they're not getting prompt responses from the agency or from the project sponsors. So there's a lot to be done on that end that's not only going to make it better for frontline communities, better for these places where the projects will be, make sure their voices are heard, but ultimately is going to speed up the timeline in the long run by allowing them to provide their feedback early on and have it taken into consideration right up front instead of considered down the road. So those are our 4 specific priorities, but there's definitely more included that will come in the future. And Ben, I know you were a Senate staffer, so you're used to things moving.
Smarter,
What?
better looking.
What?
Yep.
Yeah. What I was gonna say before I was rudely interrupted, you're used to things moving very slowly.
Yes.
Permitting,
Greatest deliberative body in the world.
slowest deliberative body in the world. Permitting has moved really fast. I feel like
Yes.
every day we're getting a new proposal, a new bill. I'm struggling to keep up. I hope some of you are in that same boat so I don't feel alone. How do we make sense of all of these proposals? How does that impact our ask?
Yeah, so I mean, as you might have seen, and a lot of going back to Dana's education, when we've been talking about this stuff, there have been a lot of bills introduced around permitting. I mean, they've been coming fast and furious for a while, and there's been outlines of what people want, and just a week or 2 ago, the New Dim Coalition released a statement on the outlines of what they would like to see in permitting reform, and so these keep coming. I've said this before, none of these are going to be the bill. A lot of the bills actually have, because of the debt ceiling, are kind of moot. And they could the ones that still have provisions that are relevant, could be the building blocks of a bipartisan package, but there's no one bill that's out there. So don't think you have to know what all of these bills, from H.R. 1 to the Carper bill to the Manchin bill, you don't need to know all the specifics of those. You just need to push that top line. Like Jen was talking about, this is something we need to get done. We need to get done in a bipartisan fashion. And one of the things I think can really be helpful, if you're still feeling overwhelmed, we do have a bunch of great panels tomorrow. We're going to have a really great panel discussion on permitting reform with some experts that will be talking about this. And I highly encourage people to try to make it to that panel and get to hear from some of the smartest people on this particular issue.
And we're also going to be, right after this, going into segment breakouts for your members of Congress, Democrats or Republicans, depending which party you'll be lobbying, which member you'll be lobbying. And in that, you'll get to practice making a permitting reform ask as well as making a carbon pricing ask for your specific member. So we'll have time to get into the weeds and figure out exactly how should you be framing this for your specific member. And with that, I want to talk about my favorite topic, I think many of your favorite topics, carbon pricing. And we've got a lot happening in the space. Obviously, a new CBAM bill that was just, not technically a CBAM, but a starting point, that was just introduced, and we're waiting eagerly for the EICDA.
Yep.
Can you talk to us about when we should expect these things, how that informs our asks?
Yeah, so everybody knows we have a primary ask in the House. That's the Energy Innovation Act. It could be introduced at any moment now, but this is a great opportunity for us to introduce the bill to freshman offices that haven't heard of it before, even though it's been out there. I assume most people in the room are pretty familiar with the bill, so we don't think we need to get into specifics, but it is coming. It's important for congressional offices on the House side to hear from you guys that it is coming, that it's still a really important tool. So the timing's great. Hit the hill. Hopefully we'll get introduction of the bill in the next couple of weeks, and this will help it get out of the gate in a strong fashion with the maximum number of original co-sponsors. So we definitely want you to talk about permitting, but we definitely want you to let House offices know the Energy Innovation Act is being reintroduced. We still support it. It is a strong, strong climate tool. And like I said in some of the earlier trainings, think about the members you're bringing it to and tailor your approach. If it was a co-sponsor from the last Congress, they might just need a heads up. You know, you don't need to give them a strong pitch for, 30 minutes. You can just say, hey, the Energy Innovation Act is coming back and we really like you to be the original co-sponsor. That might be all you need to do. Freshmen, like I said, might need a little bit more education. And the members who you've had conversations about the bill year after year, and they might be kind of a hard no, you might want to let them know we still support this, we see value in it, but you don't need to belabor the issue with them and move on to maybe more fertile ground. And as part of this kind of last minute deal, we now have a CBAM kind of support ask in the Senate. As happens usually, Congress throws us a curveball. It would have been nice if they'd introduced the Prove It Act 2 weeks ago, so we would be a little bit more prepared and didn't have it just drop on Thursday of this week. But we have uploaded materials, and what this bill is a bill that sets the foundation, kind of the precursor to eventually establishing a carbon border adjustment mechanism or a carbon tariff on imports to the United States and their carbon pollution, their carbon content. It would direct the Department of Energy to start doing reporting on the emissions from American industry and on certain foreign countries. So it's not a CBAM yet, but it's an important part of what you'll have to have for CBAM. You will need this information, and what's great about it is this is a bipartisan bill in a big way, with Senator Kramer and Coons leading, Senator Murkowski, Senator Graham are on it, Senator Hickenlooper and White House, because they want to, this is not the end, they don't want to get this bill passed and have a year and a half while you wait for the report. There is bipartisan momentum to do something about international emissions, and they want to keep the conversation going. They want to build that bipartisan momentum, and so that's why they dropped this bill. And we talked to both offices. They're thrilled that we're going to be lobbying on it. I know it dropped really close in, so we haven't gotten to do as much of the education as we'd like to. But it's pretty simple, and you will be, once again, we will have a great panel discussion with some experts, some of whom might have had a little role in writing the bill with us on Monday. And so I highly recommend you check out that panel discussion as well.
Before we dive into the next thing, I want to ask you, we've talked about this a bit in some of our trainings along the way and some of our calls that we've done virtually. how do you make sense of where we are on pricing more generally right now? We had the IRA pass, obviously the largest climate bill in the history. We still have the conflict in Ukraine and, you know, some fluctuations with energy prices and concern around that in Congress. How do you make out kind of where we stand right now and the path forward?
Well, I think this is an important step. I mean, even if it's not a domestic carbon price, I mean, it is putting a price on foreign carbon pollution. That's a carbon price. And so I think you are starting to win that argument. Thank you, Flannery. Appreciate you. We are starting to win that argument. And I should clarify, something just went off in my brain. There is another Prove It Act out there. And so you'll have to be specific, and they will know what you're talking about, because this Prove It Act is actually the providing reliable, objective, verifiable emissions intensity and transparency act, or Prove It Act, or S1863, and all that's up on community, but like the bill number is the key, S1863, to make sure you are the offices you're talking to know you're talking about the right bill.
All right, so I think with that covers our primary asks.
It does.
So we'll kind of dive into supporting asks here a little bit, and we're not going to go too in the weeds, just so we can allot a lot of time for questions and answers. But I want to first remind everyone just how important these asks are. I obviously was on the Hill, and for a long time, the primary ask, carbon pricing, we just couldn't get there, and it took a long time for me as a staffer to get up to speed. But the supporting asks, those were things I could engage on. Those were things I knew about, that I felt really relevant to our district, and that my boss was willing to take a stand on. And those policies in and of themselves are meaningful for climate. They do reduce emissions. But even bigger than that, they build relationships. They help us get a foot in the door. They help us get members even more engaged on climate. And that's exactly what happened with my boss. As soon as we were able to start engaging on some of these kind of low-hanging fruit, maybe we'll call them, we were able to start going further and further into CCL land, learning about carbon pricing, working closely with those volunteers, seeing them as trusted allies. So don't think of these as kind of, on the back burner, the kind of last minute things. Think of these as real strategic opportunities to find policies within our supporting asks that would resonate for your member, that you think would speak to your specific community, if it's an ag community or you have wildfire issues, whatever it might be. Really think of it as a strategic opportunity to try to build that relationship further. Give your member an opportunity for a win, for success that we can appreciate them for and that we can work together with them on. So with that, we have 5 supporting asks, and I'll just kind of list them out, but there's one-pagers up on community. There's different charts to show where these are relevant in terms of House and Senate members. We've got the RISE Act, which hopefully a lot of you are familiar with. It was enacted last Congress, and we got very close to it going across the finish line, but didn't quite get it across. So it's back. It's an offshore wind bill in the House and Senate. We have the Save Our Sequoias Act, which is an important bipartisan wildfire bill introduced by Representative Scott Peters, who will speak to us on Tuesday night at our reception, and Speaker McCarthy. So a really, really strong bipartisan bill there, tackling climate from a wildfire perspective. And that is a House-only bill. We have the Increased TSP Access Act, and that is an ag bill that's going to help farmers and other landowners gain access to some conservation title funding. The Seedlings for Sustainable Habitat Restoration Act, which deals with reforestation efforts. It's making a clarification from the infrastructure bill to improve the seedling, basically the seedling process, to make sure we're getting more seedlings on the line growing so that we can reforest some of our federal lands. And lastly, we have the Ready for Disasters Act, which came to us through one of our tremendous action teams, and it deals with disaster preparedness, mitigation, making sure that as we're preparing for natural disasters, we're being very inclusive of older Americans and individuals with disabilities who are disproportionately impacted by those disasters. So those are our 5 asks, and like I said, there's a lot more details online, one-pagers with a bunch of explanations on those, but I encourage you to look at them from a perspective of your member, your community, and what you think might resonate best to figure out what to plug into your meeting. And with that, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I'll just end with some final thoughts, and then we will reserve some time for questions. I mean, really, I'm not lying when I say I'm so happy to see everybody here. I think Jen's, story about like her boss and seeing all CCLers in Congress really illustrates why you being here is so important, and that why in-person lobbying is so key to pushing this cause forward. And I honestly think, I don't want to be on a soapbox for a while, I think it's going to get more and more important as new technologies emerge that kind of overwhelm Congress with communication, and there's nothing that can replicate an in-person meeting and that connection and the sheer passion that brings you guys to DC gets transmitted to Congress. And as Jen and I were talking about, there's a lot of congressional turnover. There's probably a good portion of not just members of Congress, but staff who have never had that experience that Jen and her boss did of the Rayburn cafeteria being filled with CCLers all up here talking about the same thing. And that's really powerful. And so I'm super excited about that. And because I know how effective you guys are. We have been effective in the past. We're going to be even more effective in the future. As we get out there, we have developed a track record of success that I think we can really build on. And with the permitting debate ongoing right now, our timing couldn't be better. And so I think we can really have an impact in this debate. One of the other things on some people we've talked about, we're a multi-policy organization now, and whether or not that's confusing or hard. I feel like we've been a multi-policy organization because we passed several bills. We passed the Growing Climate Solutions Act, we passed the PEST Act, we passed the Use It Act, we passed the Climate Ready Fisheries Act. So I mean, we've been doing this stuff and being effective. I don't think you need to be overwhelmed at all because you're already doing a great job. And with that, I will leave it there, and we can take some questions. And I'll just remind people that we will be we'll split up and talk about Democrats and Republicans, and get some good examples from volunteers and how they've worked with their members in the breakout sessions following this. So this won't be the end of the conversation. This is just the beginning.
All right, thank you, Ben and Jen. So while folks are getting their questions in, people are walking around picking up the questions, I want to ask y'all to go back to the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act that you mentioned is going to be reintroduced hopefully soon. But we have a lot of folks here at the conference this year who may not have been part of CCL when that bill first came onto the scene, and so I wonder if you could just give a quick definition of what that bill is and a little brief history of CCL's relationship to that bill. How did that bill come about and in relationship to our lobbying?
Yeah, I can jump in. I mean, I was there. Jen was living on the other side as I was coming to lobby her on the bill constantly, along with the volunteers. So if you know the history of CCL, we have long been focused on a carbon price, and the Energy Innovation Act was kind of our idealized version of it. And I think now, thinking back to 2017, we did achieve bipartisan introduction of the first carbon fee and dividend bill. It's a bill that places a fee on every ton of carbon pollution that steadily rises and returns 100% of revenue to American households, and includes a CBAM to protect American businesses and drive down emissions overseas. It was reintroduced in the last couple Congresses. In last Congress, we ended with 95 co-sponsors on the bill, the most of any carbon pricing bill that's ever been introduced in history. And that went a long way to making a carbon price really part of the conversation when we were working through the reconciliation process last year. It was really at the center of some of the thing around climate, And it's amazing, we got very close to a carbon price being introduced, and one of the issues that really arose was the Ukrainian war and the Russian invasion there, and the escalation in energy prices really destabilized things. And so we didn't quite get it there. We still got a really important climate bill in the IRA, but that's kind of been the trajectory of this conversation, and now hopefully, as there's really this momentum building around the idea of a carbon border tariff or CBAM, you know, we can get that momentum going again. But one step in this process is just the Energy Innovation Act getting reintroduced so we can keep those conversations going.
Awesome, thank you for that context. This is a quick question. If we're lucky enough that a representative wants to be an original co-sponsor of the Energy Innovation Act, who do we follow up with and or connect them to?
Yeah, absolutely. So Congressman Carbajal out of California will be the lead sponsor of the Energy Innovation Act. And kudos to those volunteers in his district that have worked so hard in developing that relationship over many years. And he was thrilled to take the bill over from Congressman Deutsch, who unfortunately retired last Congress from serving in office. So he will be the lead sponsor. So you can direct offices to Congressman Carvajal's office. We are also happy to talk with staffers in offices. So my contact information or Ben's is on the bottom of that one pager. So feel free to direct them to us as well. But Congressman Carbajal would be the appropriate person to speak to.
Okay, great. So this question...
I will, sorry, Flannery.
Oh.
Some people are asking for a spelling of his name. It's Carbajal, Carbajal. Sorry.
And we can use it in a sentence if you need us to. All right, so this question is asking if you could address the seeming contradiction between moving faster on clean energy projects and the need for increased community engagement. How do we balance those two priorities?
We've got to, because we know we have to build clean energy infrastructure faster, and we can improve the processes by which this is done, by having developers talking to communities earlier, by having community agreements on benefits. What I always say is we don't want a rubber stamp process. You know, permitting reform shouldn't just be that any application for an energy infrastructure project gets approved. We want to get the good projects approved faster and the bad projects rejected faster. And a good way to improve that process is to have that community engagement early on and be robust, where people feel like their concerns have been heard and they don't need to go the route of extensive litigation, etc. And so we're hoping we can find a balance there, but it's something we should certainly urge Congress to focus on.
All right, now we have a few questions about the Prove It Act, just a little bit more clarity on, is that a primary ask, a secondary ask, a bonus side dish? How do you guys think about the Prove It Act?
You know what, bonus bill, I kind of like that. We do supporting asks, we do bonus bills, like it has a nice ring to it. It is in a realm almost of its own, because we definitely want every office on the Senate side to hear about the need for permitting reform. Even offices that have led on the issue, they need to hear from us that somebody has their back. You know, people like, you know, Senator Schatz and Hickenlooper and Tina Smith have been out here talking about this issue, and they need to know that there's a support network that also believes in what they're doing. So they need to hear that we're working on this. So start there. But then I think going into the Prove It Act is a really strong place to move next. I mean, it did just drop, and so I understand if people had a plan in place and don't want to upset their plan. But if you feel like you have the bandwidth to start talking about that bill a little bit, do it. I mean, one thing I've said, and I'm going to say this a lot, I've said it 100 times probably already, the first time congressional offices ever heard the term CBAM was from CCL volunteers over the years as we've been talking about carbon pricing. So I think we have the ability to get in there and keep talking about it and say, like, hey, we got a chance to take the first bipartisan step on this. Let's do it. So I think you guys can do this on short notice.
Also, don't forget, that was our ask last June on the Senate side was CBAM. So this is an opportunity to just build on those conversations, refresh the staff's memory and the members' memory of what you talked about before, maybe answer any lingering questions, and just take it a step further with an actual piece of legislation that we can reference and take their temperature on that.
Okay, great. And is there expected to be a companion bill for the Prove It Act in the House, or is there one on the way?
It's unclear yet. Sometimes companion bills come later. There's certainly interest, but there is not one that has been introduced as of yet.
All right, and here's another one in the permitting direction, asking about not in my backyard attitudes. How would you generally recommend addressing those types of responses, the sort of NIMBY attitude, as we talk about new and expanded clean energy projects?
Yeah, I mean, there's two different sides of that coin, right? There's the question of like in your community's conversations, and then there's the congressional question, and that is somewhat what permitting reform is seeking to fix. You know, they want people who have to be able to have input from the community, but they also don't want a system where one disgruntled individual or just one type of like project gets held up for years and years and years because it might ruin somebody's view from their golf course or something. And look at these projects in the lens of like a bigger good of trying to, because one of the things is, and we know is that every bit of fossil fuel infrastructure we take offline, we have to put in place new clean energy infrastructure. So if we're ever going to get rid of this legacy fossil fuel infrastructure, we got to build stuff. And so I think that's really the heart of why we are undertaking permitting reform, because it will, in the end of the day, get us emissions reductions, and it really seeks to address some of the tools that, let's say, the NIMBYs use.
Okay, great, thank you. So we just have a couple minutes left. I'll take us out of the policy area and a little more generally into lobbying itself. I wonder if the two of you have any advice for the folks in this room who are headed to Capitol Hill on Tuesday. How do they have an effective lobby meeting and feel confident going in, especially if we've got some new lobbyists, I'm sure, in the room. So what would your advice be as they think ahead to Capitol Hill on Tuesday?
Yeah, I'll say first, something I try to remind myself, know your worth. You guys are all constituents, and that means you're valuable on Capitol Hill. You're the reason we get the meetings. You're the reason members and staff take their time. You're the reason we can put on these conferences and have members trek across DC to come talk to us. You're valuable in their eyes. Your opinion matters to them. Ultimately, your vote matters to them. But for this opportunity, what you're saying really matters. So go in there knowing that you are not taking space. You are really delivering a message that they care about and they want to hear. They want to hear what you have to say. And second of all, I'll say I always approach any meeting, even if I'm talking to a staff or an office I've known for years, with learning and listening first. And that's something CCL does so well. But giving that space to find common ground, that space to just ask open-ended questions and learn where are they on this. As much as we're pushing them on permitting and carbon pricing, we also just want to know where are they on permitting and carbon pricing. What are their hurdles? What are some of the obstacles in their way that maybe we can address or maybe we can't, and we need to go educate ourselves on so we can speak to it in a future meeting. All of these things are opportunities that you all practice over and over and do so fantastic on in meetings, and we'll get an opportunity to practice in the next segment, but I think are just really critical in any meeting.
Well said. And just remember, I mean, they're just people as well, and so I think we have really, you guys and the volunteers that have come before you have laid a really positive groundwork of that appreciation and respect where it sets things up to have a positive meeting, so you really don't have to be nervous. You can have a conversation and just find that common ground.
Fantastic. Thank you. That's all our time for this session.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.